It's the winter of 1993. Imagine waking up to a world that has just shifted beneath your feet. A mother, alone in her house, calling out for her daughter, only to find her room exactly as she left it, untouched, unoccupied. Hillary Evans, just 18, vanished into thin air in the dead of night, in a small town buried under snow. And for 25 years, the truth lay hidden, until a breakthrough that would shatter everything you thought you knew about this town, its people, and the darkness that festered in plain sight. This isn't just a missing person case. This is the haunting truth that someone in that town is still hiding. What if the real story is far darker than we could ever imagine? Stick around, because what you're about to hear will change everything. You see, Hillary Evans, 18 years old, disappeared without a trace one snowy December night in Battle Creek, Michigan. The town, like any small town, was close-knit, familiar, and safe. Nothing sinister had ever touched the place, or so everyone believed. But Hillary, she walked out into that storm, and just vanished. No one could understand it. Where did she go? Who could have taken her? For 25 years, the people of Battle Creek lived with the unanswered question. Was it just another case of a young girl who made an impulsive decision in the middle of a storm? Maybe she had just gone to a friend's house. Maybe she'd been caught in the snow. But as time went on, the question lingered. Why hadn't anyone found Hillary? Why had she just disappeared without a single sign, without a single clue? Then, in 2018, something remarkable happened. A new detective, Detective Sarah Coleman, with a fresh set of eyes, revisits the case. The old files, dusty, abandoned, forgotten. She starts looking at everything once more, with a perspective no one else had. And what she finds, what she uncovers, well, it wasn't just about Hillary anymore. It wasn't just about a missing girl. Before we dive deeper into the story, I want to know where you're watching from. Where are you listening to this heartbreaking case unfold? Let me know in the comments below. What Sarah Coleman uncovered would shake the very foundations of this small town. It would shake the Evans family to their core. And it would leave the people of Battle Creek questioning everything they thought they knew. What if the mystery wasn't just about what happened to Hillary? What if someone in that town was hiding something far darker than anyone could ever have imagined? And the worst part? We're just getting started. Stick around to the end, because this case isn't just about Hillary. The twists, they don't stop. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't the only tragedy tied to the horrors hiding in plain sight. Stay with me, because you won't believe what happens next. It's the winter of 1993. A quiet night in Battle Creek, Michigan. The kind of night where everything feels still, untouched, like the world has been wrapped in a thick white blanket. But the silence, it's broken. Margaret Evans wakes up in the early hours of the morning. The kind of hour when the world is still asleep, save for the wind howling outside her window. Her eyes flicker open, the dark room around her barely lit by the faint glow of a streetlight creeping through the curtains. She blinks a few times, the cold air seeping through the room, and then she glances over at Hillary's side of the bed. But there's something different. The bed is empty. No, this can't be right. Hillary always comes home, always. Margaret rubs her eyes, her thoughts muddled with sleep. But when she looks again, the sheets are still perfectly tucked. The pillow is fluffed, arranged just the way Hillary liked it. The comforter, pulled up neatly, as if no one had ever been in the bed at all. Margaret's stomach sinks. The feeling of dread starts to curl itself around her heart. The house feels too quiet now, too still. Something's wrong. Margaret stands up, her breath catching in her throat, the wind outside now louder, more insistent. She walks slowly toward the door to Hillary's room. Her steps echo down the hallway, the old wood creaking beneath her feet, as if the house itself is trying to tell her something she doesn't want to hear. She opens the door. The room is unchanged. No sign of a struggle. Nothing out of place. But it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like Hillary has simply left for the day. Where is she? Margaret's heart races. She calls out into the stillness, her voice trembling as it breaks the silence of the house. Hillary. No answer. She calls again, a little louder, as if somehow repeating her daughter's name will bring her back. Hillary. Nothing. The silence is deafening now, and with each passing second, Margaret's panic rises. Her hands shake as she reaches for her phone. She dials Robert's number. The phone rings, and as she waits, her breath grows shallower. Her mind races to all the worst possibilities. What if Hillary was hurt? What if something had happened to her? Finally, Robert answers. Robert. Margaret's voice cracks, a thin veil of panic threading through her words. Hillary. She's gone. She's not in her room. She's not here. What do I do? There's a pause on the other end, and Margaret can practically feel Robert's confusion, his alarm. What are you talking about? She's not there. No, she's not. Margaret replies, her voice shaking with fear now. She's not in her room. The bed is untouched, Robert. She's gone. I don't know where she is. The line is silent for a beat, the cold of the house creeping deeper into her bones. Okay, Robert says, his voice steady despite his own rising concern. I'll be home in a minute. I'll call the neighbors. We'll find her. But even as he says this, Margaret knows. She knows something is horribly wrong. This isn't just a case of a girl being out late. This is more. This is bigger. Margaret hangs up the phone, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. She walks down the hallway, her steps slower now, as if the house itself is holding her back. She picks up the phone again, dialing the number of the police. Her fingers fumble with the numbers, the pressure of the situation making everything harder. Finally, the dial tone breaks, and a voice answers on the other end. This is Battle Creek Police. How can I help you? I need to report a missing person, Margaret says quickly, her voice trembling. My daughter Hillary. She hasn't come home. I don't know where she is. It's like she just disappeared. There's a pause. The voice on the other end is calm, professional. Too calm. Okay, ma'am, let's start by taking some details. When did you last see your daughter? Margaret struggles to gather herself. She was supposed to be home last night, but she never made it back. I don't know where she is. It's just too quiet in here. She's gone, and no one has seen her. Please, you need to help me. I understand, ma'am, the voice says, a slight shift of urgency creeping into the officer's tone. We'll send an officer out right away. Please stay at home, and we'll have someone there to help. The line goes dead, but the silence in Margaret's house is now thick with fear, suffocating her. The streets are almost entirely empty, the silence of the night broken only by the sound of wind and the soft crunch of snow underfoot. The town, once peaceful and quiet, feels as though it's holding its breath. The streetlights cast a dim, pale glow over the snow, highlighting the tracks of people who have already passed by. Residents in their winter coats, going about their daily business, unaware that something is terribly wrong. But for Margaret Evans, Battle Creek is no longer the town it once was. For her, the streets are now a maze of uncertainty and dread. Margaret's heart races as she dials the number of a friend, her voice trembling. Hillary hasn't come home, she says, barely able to speak the words aloud. The snow is falling heavier now, the wind biting at the window panes. In the quiet of her home, Margaret is surrounded by nothing but the silence of a missing daughter, and the cold fear that's gripping her heart. Every minute feels like an eternity. Every second, she waits for some sign of Hillary, any clue. But as time passes, the silence becomes unbearable. The snow outside, now deeper, more impenetrable, mirrors the darkness that has settled inside Margaret's chest. Every minute that ticks by feels like another piece of hope slipping away. The camera zooms in on Hillary's bedroom again. The soft light of the moon peeks through the curtains, casting a quiet glow over the empty bed, over the pillow, over the untouched comforter. There are no signs of struggle, no indication that Hillary left in a hurry. Only a room frozen in time. A room where a girl's life is about to change forever. And as the minutes pass, and the search begins, Margaret and Robert's calls bring no answers. The neighbors know nothing. The wind howls outside, louder now, as if echoing the feeling of emptiness that has settled in the Evans home. The search starts, and the community begins to rally together. But for Margaret, nothing is ever going to be the same again. Before we dive deeper into the case, I just want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you amazing subscribers for your continuous support in helping this channel grow. These true crime stories take time, research, and a lot of hard work to produce, and it means the world to me that you're here. If this story has gripped you like it has me, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. If you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that right now so you never miss out on these shocking stories. Share this video with someone who still believes that the truth will always find its way to the surface. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, so you're the first to know whenever I drop another jaw-dropping investigation. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's continue. The morning drags on. The police have arrived, but nothing about the situation feels like it's moving forward. Sheriff Tom Brennan stands in the middle of the Evans living room, eyes scanning the faces of his small team. The storm has blanketed the town. No roads cleared, no easy routes for searching. Sheriff Brennan, a man who spent the last 11 years overseeing a quiet, uneventful town, is suddenly thrust into a nightmare far beyond what he's trained for. His small department, just 4 deputies, is barely enough to handle the usual minor calls. Traffic tickets, petty theft, the occasional break-in. But this is different. This is something he's never had to deal with. A missing person. And worse, a young girl. A town that never really experienced tragedy is now drowning in the kind of crisis it's ill-equipped to face. The team's resources are thin. There are no specialized units. No crime scene investigators. No forensic specialists ready to swoop in and examine every scrap of evidence. Just 4 deputies and a sheriff struggling to make sense of it all. Sheriff Brennan rubs a hand across his face, the stress clearly starting to show. His usual composure is slipping. "All right, folks," he says, his voice sounding more tired than he wants to admit. "We need to do this by the book. We start with a search of the house. Then we start working with the neighbors. We keep our heads straight and get this done." He looks to his deputies. 2 are already standing at the front door, coats pulled tight against the biting wind. The storm is still fierce, making visibility near zero. But they can't afford to wait. The whole town, it seems, is willing to step up. But that won't be enough. Sheriff Brennan has never faced anything like this. In his 11 years as sheriff, the biggest news in Battle Creek was a barn fire and a few petty thefts. Now, he's facing something that's larger than the confines of his little town. A missing young woman, and the storm is making everything harder. But what's worse is that he knows what's at stake. He can feel it in the air, thick with uncertainty and fear. Missing persons in Battle Creek were rare. Until now. It's supposed to be a safe place, a town where people leave their doors unlocked and greet neighbors with a smile. But something about Hillary Evans' disappearance feels different. The snowstorm makes it worse. It's almost as if the universe is conspiring to hide Hillary. The footprints she left in the snow should be an easy guide, but as the snow falls heavier, they're quickly erased. What should be a clear path is now a blur. The sheriff looks out the window, trying to make sense of it. His gut tells him something's off. This doesn't feel like a case of a girl running away. But without evidence, without answers, the investigation seems to be getting nowhere. The town is starting to crack under the weight of the uncertainty, and so is he. The first person who claims to have seen Hillary is Gary Mitchell, a neighbor, a man who's been living in Battle Creek long enough to know everyone by name. Gary Mitchell, 44 years old. A steady figure in the community, working maintenance at the Kellogg plant, known for his reliability and helpfulness. People trust Gary. People like him. And when he walks into the living room to speak with Sheriff Brennan, there's no sign of anything that would make him look out of place. He seems normal, concerned, just like any neighbor would be in a situation like this. Gary's account of what happened is simple enough. I saw her walking into the storm, Gary begins, his voice steady, though there's a flicker of something small like a hesitation before he continues. She was walking down the street, heading toward Maple Street. She was just returning a book. The sheriff nods, taking down the details. The book. Simple, almost insignificant. But it's a piece of the puzzle. Gary continues, his tone calm, but there's an edge to his words, as if he's still trying to make sense of everything. She looked like she was in a hurry. The weather was getting worse by the minute. I told her to be careful. Told her it was crazy to be out walking in that mess. He pauses, his hands shifting nervously in his pockets. The sheriff takes a step closer. And did she seem unusual? Anything off about her? Did she seem scared? Distracted? Gary shakes his head. No, not at all. She was just walking. She said she was going to return the book, that it was overdue. We didn't talk for long. Maybe a minute, 2 at most. Gary's account sounds normal. Too normal. But there's a nagging feeling in the pit of the sheriff's stomach, something not quite adding up. It's as if Gary's memory of that night, his interactions with Hillary, has been rehearsed. Too perfect. But for now it's all they have. The details are simple. Uncomplicated. A girl out for a walk, doing what any other responsible young adult would do, returning a book. But as Gary talks about it, the sheriff can't shake the feeling that something's being left out. Did she say anything else? About where she was going? Was she headed straight to the Walsh house? Brennan presses, trying to piece together more. Gary shifts uncomfortably. Yeah, she said she was going there. Told me her friend Sarah was waiting for her. I didn't think much of it. We were watching the news about the storm. The snow was coming down hard by then. I didn't think anything of it. Just that she was trying to do the right thing by returning the book. The sheriff takes a moment to digest it all. The story is clear, straightforward. There's no sign of a struggle, no sign of tension. Gary was simply being a good neighbor, just like everyone thought. Yet, as Brennan looks over at Gary, something about the man's demeanor feels off. It's not his story. It's not the facts. It's the delivery. There's a strange edge to his voice, a tension he's trying to mask. Gary Mitchell, the man who was among the first to volunteer for the search, might just be holding onto something more. With every hour that passed, the search grew more desperate. No clues. No leads. Nothing. The neighbors, the police, even the Mitchells. Everyone was searching. The whole town seemed to be mobilizing, but the snowstorm kept getting worse, blanketing the streets and the woods. Visibility was minimal. The trails Hillary might have left in the snow were already covered by more falling snow. Hillary's last known location, the corner of Maple Street, was the only place where there seemed to be any trace of her, but even that was quickly erasing itself. The search parties, despite their determination, came back empty-handed. They had nothing. Sheriff Brennan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Every hour that passed without answers made him feel like he was losing his grip. The pressure of the investigation was suffocating, weighing on him and his team. There were no breakthroughs, no clues. Just silence. And the worst part? The worst part was that the longer they searched, the more it seemed like Hillary Evans had simply vanished, disappeared into thin air. The clock was ticking. As the storm continued to rage outside, Battle Creek waited, helpless, frozen in place. What could have happened to Hillary Evans? Sheriff Brennan's frustration was mounting. And with every passing minute, his hope dwindled. Do you think Sheriff Brennan had enough resources to solve this case, especially with the snowstorm making everything harder? How would you have handled such a difficult investigation? Share your thoughts with me. I read every comment and would love to know your opinions. Days turn into weeks, and then months. Each passing day, the town of Battle Creek moves forward, trying to put the mystery of Hillary's disappearance behind them. But it hangs over everyone like a heavy fog. People go about their lives, but there's something unsettled in the air. Something broken. The Evans family, particularly Margaret, continue their quiet rituals. The kind of small actions that are meant to keep the daily routine intact. The mailbox is still checked every day, even though there's never a letter about Hillary's whereabouts. Her absence is now part of the fabric of their home, a silence that echoes through every room. But for Margaret, nothing, and I mean nothing, can fill the hole that Hillary's disappearance has left behind. It's an ache that resides deep within her chest. The pain never leaves, it only shifts, sometimes dull, sometimes sharp, but always present. Every night, she sits alone in Hillary's room, the only place in the house that still holds a fragment of her daughter. The bed is exactly as it was the night Hillary disappeared. The comforter pulled up, the pillows arranged just so. Everything in its place, frozen in time. But time is moving, and Margaret is growing weary. Margaret walks into the police station, again. It's a ritual now. Every Tuesday and Friday, without fail, Margaret Evans comes to the Battle Creek Police Department. She walks through those familiar doors, asks the same questions, and hears the same answers. Nothing new yet, Margaret. Sorry, we're still waiting on leads. Have you checked the snow again, Sheriff? The search. Every time, she feels the same thin thread of hope. But the thread is unraveling fast. Margaret's eyes flicker with exhaustion, her face drawn, hollowed by the months of unanswered questions. She wears it like a cloak. It's been a year. A year without answers. A year without closure. And yet, every time she enters that station, she does it with the same quiet hope, hoping today will be the day. The day the phone rings with an answer. The day the officer says, "We found something." But every time, the phone stays silent. It's been months, and Margaret's hope is starting to feel like an echo of what it once was. But she doesn't stop. She can't. Margaret walks into Hillary's room. Her movements are slow now, the ritual weighing heavier with each passing day. She stands there, staring at the bed, the dresser, the tiny details that Hillary left behind. A book left open on the bedside table. A sweater tossed carelessly across the chair. Her daughter's world, suspended in time. Margaret feels the grief rise, tighten her chest, and she lets it overwhelm her for just a moment. It's all she can do. But no matter how many times she stands there, no matter how many times she wishes for something, some sign that Hillary will walk back through that door, nothing changes. She sits down on the edge of the bed, fingers running across the blanket, her eyes fixed on the corner where Hillary's favorite book used to lie. What if I never find out what happened to my daughter? She speaks the words aloud, her voice soft, trembling. It's the question that every parent fears asking, the question that consumes them in their worst moments. And yet, she has to ask it, because it's the only thing left. Her voice cracks, and a sob threatens to break through. But she holds it back. Margaret's learned to hold back the grief. 4 years now, she's kept it inside, locked away, hoping, praying that one day she'll have the answers she's been searching for. But as time stretches on, the hope becomes harder to carry. What if I never know? What if I never find out what happened to Hillary? The words repeat in her mind, echoing with every step she takes. The fear of unanswered questions is suffocating, and it drags her deeper into a place of silence and despair. She picks up the missing person poster from the wall. It's been hanging there for months, the edges now curled, the once crisp edges of Hillary's smiling face beginning to fade. The colors are no longer sharp, the picture becoming a ghost of its former self. That poster, once a beacon of hope, now a symbol of unanswered prayers. A reminder of the years passing, of the fact that the answers have yet to come. The weight of the poster in her hands feels heavier than it ever has. The paper is now brittle, the message fading as time continues to march on. It's the only thing left, a fading memory of a daughter whose life was so full of promise. A life snatched away, leaving only the question, why? And yet, despite all of this, Margaret keeps coming back. Because she has to. There is no other option. She can't let go. Not yet. Not when she still believes deep down that the truth is out there somewhere. But the clock keeps ticking, and the world keeps moving forward. While Margaret, caught in her grief, remains stuck in that same moment, the moment when Hillary disappeared into the storm. Little did Margaret know. The case, as cold as it seemed now, was about to shift. The pieces of the puzzle were still scattered, but they were slowly being rearranged in ways no one could have predicted. The police have all but given up, or at least that's what it looks like. The investigation is still open, but there's nothing new. There's no movement. Just the same empty answers. The town has moved on. People are still talking about the weather, the crops, the mundane daily events. But Hillary, she's fading from everyone's thoughts. No one talks about her anymore. The missing person posters, once filled with faces that were determined to find her, now just sit unnoticed, fading in the background. The town is forgetting, slowly, imperceptibly. But that doesn't mean the case is over. Not by a long shot. Because someone is out there still holding onto the truth. Someone who knows exactly what happened to Hillary Evans. And soon they will come forward. But for now, Margaret sits in the silence of her daughter's room, clutching the edges of hope, even though it feels like it's slipping away. Margaret's hands tremble as she gently places the poster back on the wall, the corners curling more with every day. The room feels colder now, quieter. The storm outside has long passed, but the one inside Margaret's heart rages on, relentless. What if I never find out? The question hangs heavy in the room. It echoes in the empty space, but she doesn't have an answer. All she has is the cold reality of the passage of time and the growing weight of unknowing. But the truth is, little did Margaret know. The answers were closer than they seemed. They were about to be found, buried under layers of time, under layers of trust. Because sometimes the truth doesn't hide in the shadows. It waits patiently, quietly, until it's ready to be discovered, just when no one expects it. And when that truth is revealed, it will shatter everything Margaret thought she knew. The camera pulls away, leaving Margaret standing alone in the center of the room. Her gaze lingers on the bed, the dresser, the untouched remnants of her daughter's life. The room, frozen in time, becomes a metaphor for the town itself, a place where memories refuse to fade, where hope hangs on by a thread. But soon, the threads of this story will begin to unravel. And when they do, nothing in Battle Creek will ever be the same. The cold case that's been haunting this small town is about to turn into something much darker. Margaret's life became consumed by the search for Hillary, and the years just kept slipping by. Can you imagine how heartbreaking it must have been for her to hold on to hope year after year? What do you think it takes to keep pushing for answers like that? I read and reply to all your comments, so let's talk in the comments below. I want to hear your thoughts. It's 2018, and the case of Hillary Evans is nothing more than a fading memory. The town of Battle Creek has long since moved on, with time slowly eroding any hope of answers. But in the shadows of unsolved mysteries, a new detective enters the picture. A fresh face with fresh eyes. Her name is Sarah Coleman, and she's been assigned to the cold case unit. Sarah's reputation as a meticulous investigator precedes her. She's not like the others. Her focus isn't just on finding answers. It's on finding the truth. Cold cases are her specialty, and she's seen it all. She's worked through the pain of unsolved crimes, combed through the evidence that's been left behind, and most importantly, she's made her peace with the patience that cold cases demand. But Battle Creek, this small, quiet town, she's about to learn that it holds a story darker than any she's ever encountered before. She digs in, begins sifting through the layers of the case file. The missing posters, the search party reports, the interviews with neighbors. But as she pores over the documents, the usual details don't jump out. There's something off. Something beneath the surface that doesn't sit right. With every page turned, Sarah senses a different kind of rhythm. Something hidden in plain sight, just waiting for the right person to see it. Sarah's hands steady as she flips through the case files. Decades of paperwork, of frustration, of broken lives. She feels the weight of it, the weight of a family's pain that's gone unanswered for 25 years. But there's one thing Sarah knows better than anyone. Cold cases require fresh eyes. And she's not just there to look at what everyone else has already seen. She's here to find what's been buried. With that mindset, she dives into the evidence, revisiting everything from the beginning. She sifts through witness statements, interview transcripts, police reports, even the smallest scraps of information, looking for that one detail that might have been overlooked. And then, as if fate is guiding her, it happens. She's staring at a set of photos. Simple evidence from Hillary's clothes, remnants that the previous investigators had dismissed as irrelevant. It's a small detail, almost inconsequential, but Sarah feels the flicker of something. Something big. She takes a breath and reaches for the file with the evidence report. She's about to make the discovery that no one could have anticipated. With a fresh set of eyes, Sarah dives into the case. The clock ticks louder as she spends hour after hour, investigating the same old details, but this time with renewed purpose. The pieces fall into place slowly, but with each discovery, Sarah's heart beats faster. She's getting closer. And then it happens. A piece of evidence no one had noticed before. A piece that changes everything. DNA. Gary Mitchell's DNA. Gary Mitchell. The man who had been a trusted neighbor. The one who had spoken to Hillary the night she disappeared. The man who had helped organize search parties, offered comforting words to the grieving parents, and appeared to be nothing more than a concerned neighbor. How could this trusted neighbor be involved? What had he been hiding all these years? Sarah's mind races as she tries to make sense of it. The DNA found on Hillary's clothing was too important to ignore. But how did it get there? And why? Was it truly an accident? Did Gary Mitchell play a role in her disappearance, as he had said? Or had there been something more sinister going on? The more Sarah digs, the more questions emerge. What had Mitchell been hiding? Had he known Hillary was in danger and done nothing to help? Had he been complicit in her death? Or was there something even darker beneath the surface? The room feels colder now, the air thick with tension. Sarah's fingers hover over the file, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Her breath catches in her throat. She knows deep down that she's on the verge of a breakthrough. But she doesn't have all the answers yet. She needs more. She needs context. She needs to understand why the DNA was there. Was it accidental, as Mitchell claimed? Or was it something darker, something calculated? The tension is unbearable. The breakthrough that could solve the case is close. But there's one thing Sarah can't ignore. The more she uncovers, the more she realizes this isn't just a missing person case anymore. This is murder. As Sarah stands in the quiet of the evidence room, she feels her pulse quicken. The case has just shifted into a completely new dimension. This isn't about a missing girl anymore. The more she unravels, the more she realizes this is a case built on deception, hidden behind layers of trust and kindness. Gary Mitchell had been one of the last people to see Hillary alive, a seemingly concerned neighbor, a trusted friend. But now, the evidence paints a very different picture. The DNA, the lies, the secrecy. It all begins to build piece by piece. Gary Mitchell's involvement is no longer a question of if, but how. The pieces don't just fit together. They form a disturbing picture of betrayal, lies, and murder. Gary Mitchell was involved. But how deep does it go? Sarah thinks to herself, as her mind races ahead of her. Was it an accident? Or was it something worse? As Sarah pulls the evidence into sharper focus, the truth begins to take shape. Gary Mitchell wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't just someone who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, he had actively hidden something. A secret, long buried beneath his seemingly innocent actions. Sarah stands in the evidence room, flipping through pages and photos, retracing Mitchell's every step, his every word. The narrative she thought she knew begins to crumble. The interviews with Mitchell, the accounts from neighbors, they all add up. Yes, but they add up to something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. The camera zooms in on Sarah's face, her expression tense, her brow furrowed. The pieces come together with chilling precision. This case was never about a missing girl lost in a snowstorm. It was always about something darker, a quiet town, a trusted neighbor, and a lie so big it had destroyed everything in its wake. And now, Sarah has uncovered that lie. This wasn't just a disappearance. This was a murder. What they thought was a community tragedy was about to become a web of lies and deception, spun by someone the town had trusted. And that trust, it had been broken long ago. As Sarah Coleman stands there, looking at the DNA evidence that now ties Gary Mitchell to Hillary's disappearance, the story has changed. What seemed like a tragic mystery has morphed into something much, much darker. And the community, once safe in the knowledge that nothing sinister could happen here, is about to learn that the true horror had been hiding in plain sight the whole time. Now that the puzzle is coming together, one question remains. How far will Sarah go to unravel the truth? And will the rest of Battle Creek be ready for the shocking revelations yet to come? The quiet town was never what it seemed. Wow, the moment Detective Sarah Coleman found that crucial DNA evidence, the case completely turned on its head. Did you ever expect a trusted neighbor like Gary to be tied to this? What's your reaction to this shocking twist? I'm reading and replying to every comment, so share your thoughts below. And tell me, where are you watching from? Gary Mitchell had always been known as the good neighbor, the kind of man who would shovel your driveway without being asked, who remembered your birthday and made sure to ask about your kids. He was there in times of need, the first to volunteer when the community called for help, and always with a warm smile, ready to lend a hand. To the people of Battle Creek, Gary was as trustworthy as they come. But that's the thing about trust, isn't it? It's built over years, bit by bit, in small everyday acts. And when that trust is broken, the damage goes deeper than just the betrayal. It cuts into the fabric of a community, shakes the very foundation of what you thought you knew about someone. And no one knew this better than the Evans family. Gary had been one of the first to step forward when Hillary went missing, offering his help without hesitation. He had joined the search parties, helped organize people to comb the streets, and even comforted Margaret and Robert Evans as the hours turned into days with no sign of their daughter. And in those first few days, no one doubted him. He was the concerned neighbor, the one who had seen Hillary walking into the snowstorm, the one who was there that night. He was just like everyone else, a person grieving, searching for answers. But as the days wore on, and the case seemed to stall, something began to shift. Slowly, like a shadow creeping across a sunlit room, a sense of unease started to grow. Gary had lived on 3rd Street for nearly a decade. He was a fixture in the community, a well-known face who had raised his family here, worked at the Kellogg plant, and made a name for himself as the kind of man you could count on. His wife, Linda, had been by his side through it all, and together they had created a life. But as Sarah Coleman began to dig deeper into Gary's background, something started to surface. The more she looked at his interactions with Hillary, the more she began to notice subtle cracks in his story. The smooth surface of Gary Mitchell's life wasn't as pristine as it seemed. It wasn't just the DNA on Hillary's coat that made Sarah start to question Gary. It was the discrepancies in his statements, the little things that didn't add up. At first, it was minor, a detail he had missed in his initial interviews, a story that shifted slightly every time he was asked to retell it. But then it started to escalate. His memory of that night, the night he claimed to have seen Hillary walking toward Maple Street in the snowstorm, changed with every interview. At first, He'd said she was just going to return a book. Simple enough. A harmless detail, the kind of thing you'd remember if you were paying attention. But as Sarah pored over the interviews, she noticed something strange. Gary's retelling of the same events started to evolve. At one point, he mentioned that Hillary had been hurrying because the storm was so bad. Later, he said she had been struggling to walk in the snow. Then, in another version, he claimed he had offered her a ride, but she had refused. Small inconsistencies, yes, but when pieced together, they started to tell a different story. These weren't the marks of a man who was simply recounting what had happened. No, this was the behavior of someone who was thinking about what had happened, who was carefully crafting his version of the story to make sure it lined up with what others wanted to hear. And as Sarah dug deeper, she found more troubling signs. Gary's alibi, his story of being inside when Hillary walked past his house, began to feel flimsy. Linda, his wife, had backed up his account, but Sarah noticed that Linda had never actually seen Hillary that night. It was all based on what Gary had told her. Was Gary lying? And if he was, what was he trying to cover up? Sarah's investigation took a new direction. It wasn't just about the missing persons case anymore. It was about Gary Mitchell, the man who had been one of the last people to see Hillary alive. The more Sarah learned about Gary, the more her unease grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just some innocent bystander caught in a tragic event. No, there was something darker at play. Something he was hiding. It wasn't until Sarah revisited the footage of Gary from the search parties that the truth began to hit her. In one of the interviews, Gary had been asked how he felt about the disappearance of Hillary Evans. He had responded with a forced, nervous chuckle. The interview went on, but Sarah's eyes were glued to his hands, the way they trembled slightly as he adjusted his shirt, the nervous, almost unconscious movements he made with his fingers. A man under pressure. A man hiding something. The pieces were there. Now, all Sarah needed was the confirmation. But every flashback, every moment captured on film, felt different now. The interactions that had once seemed so innocent now looked off. Slow-motion replays of Gary's innocent actions now laced with suspicion. The way his eyes darted away from the camera, the slight pause before he answered a question, the way he was always just a little too eager to help. The flashbacks, once full of compassion, now revealed an undertone of deception. And with every step, every new piece of information that came to light, Sarah couldn't help but ask herself, was Gary Mitchell the man everyone thought he was? Or was he something far worse? Gary Mitchell was not the hero he appeared to be. The dark truth was slowly creeping into the light, and Sarah felt the weight of it pressing down on her shoulders. She had spent hours looking at Gary's statements, watching his interviews, listening to his carefully crafted answers. And slowly, like peeling back the layers of an onion, she began to uncover the truth. Gary Mitchell had been hiding something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. But the confession, it was still a long way off. Sarah knew that in cases like this, you couldn't rush the process. She had to give Gary time. Time to make a mistake. Time to unravel. But as she stared at the evidence in front of her, his DNA, the discrepancies in his statements, the signs of nervousness, the lies that had stacked up, she knew one thing for sure. Gary Mitchell wasn't just a witness to Hillary's disappearance. He was the key to solving the case. And when the confession finally came, when the truth finally spilled out, it would shock everyone who had ever believed in him. Gary Mitchell seemed so trustworthy, yet there were all these strange inconsistencies in his story. How do you think someone can keep such a dark secret for so long? Do you think he could have been hiding even more than we know? I read every single comment, so let's discuss it. The interrogation room was cold. Cold in a way that made the walls feel like they were closing in on you, suffocating every thought. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, a sound that grew louder with each passing second. Gary Mitchell sat across from Detective Sarah Coleman, his hands trembling in his lap, his eyes avoiding hers. Sarah had seen this before. The tension, the guilt, the weight of a confession hanging in the air. It was a delicate moment, one where the smallest detail could break a person, could shatter the walls they had built around themselves. And as Sarah looked at Gary, she knew this was it. This was the moment that would either unravel everything or push him further into the depths of his lies. Gary had always been the perfect neighbor, the one who had helped search for Hillary, the one who had comforted the grieving family, the one who had seemed to have no connection to the crime. He had been part of the town's fabric, a trusted figure in a community that had known him for years. And now, here he was, sitting across from Sarah, a man whose carefully crafted image was about to come crashing down. Sarah leaned forward, placing the folder on the table with a deliberate thud. She didn't need to say much. She knew that the truth was coming, whether Gary was ready for it or not. "I've got the DNA, Gary," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "It's on Hillary's clothing. Your DNA." Gary's face paled. The breath he had been holding in seemed to escape all at once, a sigh of defeat. His hands, once still, now began to shake. The tremor was subtle at first, but it grew as the seconds ticked by. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something to latch onto, anything to avoid the reality that was crashing in on him. Sarah didn't wait for him to speak. She let the silence hang in the air like a thick fog, pressing down on Gary until he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't escape. "I didn't want to hurt her," Gary muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes met hers for the first time, and Sarah saw the raw fear in them. Fear not of being caught, but of the truth that was coming. Gary swallowed hard, his chest rising and falling as if the weight of his confession was too much to bear. The man who had been so confident in his lies, so sure of the mask he had worn for 25 years, was beginning to crumble before her eyes. The confession, when it came, wasn't sudden. It wasn't the dramatic outburst that Sarah had seen in other cases. No, Gary's confession was slow. It crept out like the trickle of water from a dam that had been holding back a flood. He didn't want to admit it. He didn't want to acknowledge the truth. But the walls were closing in. "I didn't mean to," Gary's voice cracked. "She was just walking. I just wanted to help her, to make sure she was okay." The storm was getting worse. Sarah's eyes never left his face, her gaze steady, unwavering. She had to make him say it. She had to make him face what he had done. "But she didn't need your help, did she, Gary?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but pointed. "She didn't ask for your help, did she?" Gary's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white as he squeezed them together. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his face contorted with a mix of guilt and frustration. He was fighting something inside, something that had been buried for years. But it was coming out now. "She didn't want to go with me," Gary continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "She didn't want to get in the truck. She was scared. And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let her walk in that storm. She didn't understand. I didn't know what else to do." And then, the moment Sarah had been waiting for, the moment when the mask finally shattered and the truth spilled out. "She resisted," Gary whispered, barely audible, as if speaking the words aloud would make them too real. "She didn't want to go. And I grabbed her. Just to stop her. To keep her with me. But she pulled away. And she fell. She hit her head on the table. She was out cold, and I didn't know what to do. I panicked." Sarah's breath caught in her throat, the words hanging in the air like a cold wind. This was it. This was the truth. The man who had been part of the search, the one who had comforted the Evans family, had caused Hillary's death in a fit of panic and fear. Gary's confession continued, his voice now barely more than a whisper, as he relived the horrifying moment when he had lost control. "I didn't mean for her to die," Gary sobbed, his face contorting with shame. "I never wanted that. But when she hit her head, I didn't know what to do. So I carried her. I put her in my truck, and I drove her to the quarry. I thought I could just Just leave her there. Let the snow cover it all up. The room seemed to close in on Gary as the weight of his words settled in. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. Gary's face twisted with guilt, and tears began to well in his eyes. His hands trembled uncontrollably now, the shaking growing worse with every word he spoke. His voice cracked again, the weight of his confession nearly too much for him to bear. "I thought I could just make it go away," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "But I couldn't. I couldn't forget. I couldn't live with it. I didn't know how to fix it. So I kept lying. I kept pretending. I kept helping. But I knew. I knew what I had done. And I couldn't make it right." Sarah sat still, her face unreadable as she watched Gary break down in front of her. This wasn't just a confession. This was a man who had been living with the weight of his guilt for 25 years, a man who had deceived an entire town, an entire family, and himself. The guilt was written all over his face. It wasn't the satisfaction of catching a criminal. It was the pain of understanding the depths of human deceit. Gary Mitchell had been hiding in plain sight, playing the part of a concerned neighbor, a helpful figure in a community that trusted him. But now all that was gone. The truth was out, and there was no denying it. What Gary Mitchell had kept hidden for 25 years was about to be exposed. A simple act of panic, a single moment that had spiraled into a lifetime of lies and deception. But even with the truth out in the open, could there ever be any real justice? The confession was raw, emotional, and devastating. Gary had admitted to the crime, but the question remained. Could the town ever forgive him? Could the Evans family ever heal from the betrayal of a trusted neighbor? And then, as Gary's tears fell, he muttered something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "There's more, isn't there?" He wasn't just talking about Hillary. And that question, what else had Gary been hiding, hung in the air like a dark cloud waiting to burst open. The confession had come, but it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Gary's breakdown wasn't just about one murder. It wasn't just about Hillary Evans. There were more secrets, more lies, more things left unsaid. And as Sarah stared at Gary, something told her that the worst was still yet to come. Gary finally admitted what he did, but his confession left a lot of unanswered questions. What do you think drove him to do what he did? Was it truly an accident, or did something darker lie beneath? I read and reply to all your comments, so tell me what you think. The courtroom was filled with silence, a heavy, thick silence that pressed down on everyone present. The wooden benches, worn and polished with years of use, creaked as people shifted in their seats, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. The air was taut with anticipation. This was it. The end of a 25-year-long nightmare. A conclusion that had been so long in coming, no one truly knew how to react when the time finally arrived. Gary Mitchell sat at the defendant's table, his once strong shoulders now slumped with the weight of years spent hiding the truth. His hands, those same hands that had once comforted the Evans family, now fidgeted nervously in his lap. His head was low, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, avoiding the eyes of the people whose lives he had destroyed. The judge, a stern figure who had presided over countless cases in her time, now prepared to deliver a verdict that would bring an end to a chapter of pain, grief, and deception. The words she spoke carried the weight of history, the weight of all that had come before. Gary Mitchell, you have been found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Hillary Evans. You will serve 20 to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. The court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The finality of it, the cold certainty of justice, was a bittersweet victory. The case, after all these years, had been solved. But for Margaret Evans, the woman who had spent a quarter of a century searching for answers, justice felt hollow. There was no satisfaction in this moment, no true peace. Hillary would never come back, and no amount of time behind bars could bring her back. The camera panned to Margaret Evans, seated in the front row of the courtroom. Her face was a mixture of emotions, each one layered on top of the other, each one pressing down on her heart like an anchor. The relief that had come with the guilty verdict was evident, but so was the sorrow, the kind of sorrow that only a mother who had lost her child could know. Margaret sat straight, her shoulders firm, her back rigid with the quiet strength she had carried with her for years. But beneath that exterior, there was a profound ache. A mother's ache. A mother who had lost her daughter in the most unimaginable way and had waited decades for answers. Answers she had finally received. But at a cost. The camera lingered on her face, capturing the fleeting expressions that danced across it. Relief, grief, resignation. The tears, which had been absent for so long, now welled up in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She held them back, not because she was strong, but because she had no more tears left to cry. The emptiness of it all had consumed her long ago. Margaret's hands were folded in her lap, her fingers twisted together as if trying to hold on to something. To hold on to her daughter's memory. To hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, there was something more she could have done. But there was nothing. Nothing except this moment. The moment when she could finally, after 25 years, say goodbye to the haunting mystery that had gripped her life for so long. The camera then shifted to Gary Mitchell, his face pale, his eyes still avoiding the gaze of those around him. He knew he was guilty, but the reality of it was too much to bear. The years of deception had caught up with him, and now all that was left was the price of his actions. The price of the life he had stolen. The contrast between the two individuals was stark. On one hand, Margaret Evans, her life torn apart by the absence of her daughter, but now finding the faintest trace of closure in the justice that had finally come. On the other, Gary Mitchell, his world crumbling, his life ruined by the truth that had been buried for so long. And then there was the courtroom. The faces of the people who had witnessed the events unfold. The families who had prayed for this moment. The town that had waited for resolution. They all watched in silence, as if unsure how to feel. There was no celebration here, no cheer of triumph. Just a somber recognition that justice, while served, could never bring back what had been lost. Margaret Evans, now 73, could finally say goodbye to the haunting mystery that had gripped her for 25 long years. The endless nights of searching, the days spent in the cold, the endless waiting, all of it had come to an end. She had finally found out what had happened to her daughter. But the cost of justice was almost too much to bear. As the courtroom emptied and the buzz of the crowd faded into the distance, Margaret stood alone. She didn't feel victorious. There was no triumph in her step as she walked out into the cold, the weight of the world still pressing down on her. The snow outside had started to fall again, soft and silent, just like the way it had all started. A quiet town, a mysterious disappearance, and a woman who had spent her entire life searching for answers. The camera followed Margaret as she walked down the steps of the courthouse, her face weary but resolute. She had finally gotten what she had waited for all these years, the truth. And yet, as she stepped out into the cold, the feeling was hollow. She had lost Hillary once, and now she had lost the final piece of herself. Gary Mitchell had been sentenced. But what did that mean now? What did it mean for a mother who had spent 25 years living with the weight of a daughter's absence? Nothing could change what had happened, and no amount of justice could bring her back. But at least for Margaret, this long journey had come to an end. The truth had been uncovered, and the mystery was solved. For the first time in 25 years, she could breathe a little easier. But for Margaret, it wasn't about the sentence. It wasn't about the prison bars or the time Gary Mitchell would spend behind them. It was about Hillary. And no matter how much justice was served, no matter how many years were added to Gary's life, it would never bring her daughter back. This was the price of justice, a price that Margaret had been forced to pay with the years of her life, a price that no one could ever truly understand. The final shot was a lingering one. Margaret's back to the camera, walking away from the courthouse, her shoulders straight but her heart heavy, disappearing into the distance as the screen faded to black. The haunting silence of Battle Creek continued to fall. the mystery of Hillary Evans finally put to rest. But in the end, the only thing that remained was the pain of a mother's love, and the heartbreaking reality that justice, no matter how much it had been sought, would never be enough to heal the wounds of a lifetime. The world had just started to return to some semblance of normal. The case of Hillary Evans had been solved. Gary Mitchell was behind bars. The small town of Battle Creek, Michigan, could finally breathe. The people, once shaken by the unspeakable tragedy, had begun to move on. But not everyone had the peace they longed for. It was a late afternoon when Detective Sarah Coleman sat at her desk, reviewing the final pieces of the Hillary Evans case file. The hum of her office's fluorescent lights seemed to echo the silence that had settled over her mind. She'd brought the case this far, but she knew that the answers to the questions that lingered in her heart were not as easy to digest as they seemed. It wasn't the first time she had felt the creeping weight of doubt about Gary Mitchell. After all, how could a trusted neighbor, a man who had helped search for Hillary, comforted the grieving Evans family, and even stood as a pillar of the community for years, how could he be the same man who had taken her life? But it wasn't until she was sitting there, scrolling through some old notes, that something caught her eye. It was a letter. The type of letter that made her stomach twist as she read the opening line. "Detective Coleman," it started. "I have something you need to know. There may be more to Gary Mitchell's past than you think." Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the words, her mind immediately flooding with possibilities. What was this? A last-ditch effort from someone trying to make their own version of the truth stick? Or something else? Something darker? The letter was short, but it carried an air of foreboding. It suggested that Mitchell's history, far from being the one he had so carefully built for himself, might have been hiding something far more sinister. The writer claimed to have knowledge of another person, a victim, whose fate had somehow crossed paths with Gary Mitchell's long before Hillary Evans had disappeared. The letter didn't name the victim. It didn't give details. It didn't even hint at how this new information tied into Mitchell's actions on the night of December 15th, 1993. All it said was this: "You don't know everything about Gary Mitchell. Look harder." The implications hit Coleman hard, the weight of the discovery not fully sinking in until she read those words again, more carefully this time. Look harder. It wasn't just an anonymous tip. It was a challenge to uncover something more, and perhaps to reveal yet another layer of Gary Mitchell's secrets. What did this mean for the case? What did this mean for the town of Battle Creek, where everyone had believed, for a quarter of a century, that Gary was simply a witness, a good neighbor caught in a horrible storm of circumstance? The case of Hillary Evans was closed. But was it? Those words rang in her head, louder than any of the other thoughts swirling inside her. As much as the truth had been revealed, the story seemed to have more chapters waiting to be written. Could it be that Mitchell wasn't the only one hiding a dark secret? Could there have been another victim? Someone who never had a voice? The questions were swirling, turning in Coleman's mind like a storm that wouldn't stop. The letter had opened a door. And Detective Coleman knew, as much as she wanted to walk away, as much as she wished this case had been finished, she couldn't. The nagging feeling at the back of her mind told her there was more. And it was that very sense of uncertainty that drove her to keep pushing. The camera zooms in on the letter, the camera angle so tight it seems to draw the words right off the paper. The bright office lights cast stark shadows over the paper's edges, highlighting the final line that seemed to pulse with unseen danger. Look harder. Coleman sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving the words. She felt the weight of those words deep in her chest, like an old wound reopening. She'd already uncovered so much about Gary Mitchell. His life, his lies, his twisted confession. What more could there be? The letter, still in her hands, seemed to carry a dark energy with it. As her fingers trembled slightly while she turned the page, her mind raced through the possibilities. Was this just someone trying to gain attention? Or was there a deeper truth buried somewhere, hidden in the fog of Mitchell's past? The snow was falling outside her office window as the evening drew closer, just as it had on the night Hillary disappeared. The same kind of cold, unrelenting snow that had made it impossible for anyone to see the truth then. Could the snowstorms be a metaphor for the fog Mitchell had created around himself? A thick, chilling veil that had obscured the real story for so long? But now the storm was clearing, and Detective Coleman was determined to follow this new lead, no matter where it took her. As she gathered the letter and placed it down on her desk, a new thought lingered in her mind. Could this be the key to unraveling everything? The camera cuts to her determined face, her eyes now filled with a resolute fire. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. The scene cuts away from her, but the feeling of unease doesn't leave. The tension is palpable. There's something else out there, something that remains hidden. As the camera follows her into the hallway, the sense of dread continues to grow. It's not over. This case, which everyone had thought was closed, had just opened another door. What was beyond it? And who else could be involved in this twisted web? Could Gary Mitchell's past be even darker than we could have imagined? The question haunted Detective Coleman, and as she walked through the dimly lit corridors of the police department, she could feel the weight of it on her shoulders. What had she missed? What had the people of Battle Creek missed? Was there another victim whose name had been forgotten, lost to time, just like Hillary's had been for so long? The camera lingers on the hall as the lights flicker above her. She's walking into the unknown now, not just as a detective, but as someone who might uncover yet another horror, a part of the past so dark that it could break the fragile peace that Battle Creek had held for years. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as Detective Coleman turned the corner, her footsteps echoing down the long hallway. Gary Mitchell's past was far from the clear story people thought they knew. But how deep did this darkness run? What secrets did he still hold in the depths of his life? And more importantly, what had he done to cover up the truth for so many years? The story wasn't over. In fact, it might have only just begun. With the final words echoing in the room, the camera freezes on a shot of the anonymous letter, still sitting on Detective Coleman's desk. The question, could Gary Mitchell's past be even darker than we could have imagined, looms large across the screen. The tension heightens, the background music playing softly, intensifying with each passing moment as the camera slowly fades to black. The mystery was far from over, and in the shadows, more secrets were waiting to be revealed. But what could they mean for the case? What could they mean for the town of Battle Creek? The words appear on screen, flashing like an urgent warning. Stay tuned. It's the kind of case that sticks with you, that haunts you long after the courtroom doors close and the gavel has fallen. Battle Creek, Michigan, had lived with the shadow of Hillary Evans' disappearance for 25 long years. The town, once shaken by fear and confusion, had found a semblance of closure when Gary Mitchell was arrested, tried, and sentenced. For Margaret Evans, the woman who had never stopped searching for her daughter, the truth had finally been revealed. But the relief, if you could call it that, came with a heavy price. For her, the mystery was no longer just about finding answers. It was about accepting the truth, something that had eluded her for a quarter of a century. Margaret Evans, now 73 years old, could never fully let go of the memories of her daughter. The hole that Hillary's disappearance had left in her heart would never be filled, no matter how much time passed. The truth, as devastating as it was, had at least freed her from the agonizing unknown. It was a truth that had been buried beneath layers of deception, pain, and the guilt of a man who had hidden his dark secret for years. But for the Evans family, and for everyone who had known and loved Hillary, this wasn't just about finding out what had happened that night. It was about confronting the brutal reality that the man they had trusted, the neighbor, the friend, the one who had stood beside them during their darkest moments, was the very person responsible for destroying their lives. The case was solved, yes, but no amount of closure could erase the scars left by those 25 years of uncertainty. No matter what sentence Gary Mitchell faced, no amount of justice could bring back the girl who was stolen from her family in the middle of a snowstorm. For Margaret Evans, the years ahead wouldn't be filled with the joy of having her daughter back. There would be no birthday parties, no weddings, no grandchildren to carry on Hillary's name. Only the memories and the haunting what-ifs that would never go away. What kind of justice, really, can fill the void left by a life taken too soon? For Hilary Evans, the promise of a future was stripped away in the blink of an eye, and for Margaret, the grief would never truly leave. As the final gavel came down in the courtroom, sealing Gary Mitchell's fate, the town of Battle Creek could exhale. But they would never forget. They couldn't. The community had changed. Forever. The story of Hilary Evans wasn't just a tragic disappearance. It became part of the town's history. The quiet streets, the neighbors who once trusted each other, were now marked by the ghost of what had been lost. And with that loss came a new understanding of what it meant to live with secrets buried so deep, no one could ever have imagined the truth. People would go on with their lives. The factory workers, the shopkeepers, the kids who had grown up hearing the stories of Hilary's disappearance, they would continue, but they'd never look at their neighbors the same way. The small town of Battle Creek would always carry the weight of this tragedy with them. Gary Mitchell was convicted, but the real question, one that still echoed in the background, was whether justice had truly been served. The legal process was over, but for everyone involved, the emotional process was just beginning. What does it mean to seek justice? To uncover the truth? And what does it cost? In Battle Creek, the town had gotten its closure. But at what cost? For Margaret Evans, the pain of losing Hilary would never fade. Her journey was one of unimaginable heartbreak, and yet she had kept fighting for answers. She had spent 25 years carrying a burden that no parent should ever bear, driven by a single unwavering question: what happened to my daughter? And when she finally got the answer, it came not as relief, but as another wound. A wound that, while it may have healed slightly over time, would never completely close. Margaret's life had been irrevocably altered. And while the mystery of Hilary's disappearance was solved, the emotional toll on Margaret, and on the community, could never be fully accounted for. The truth had been uncovered. But some truths, once revealed, leave scars that never fade. Hilary's life, her future, her potential, gone in the blink of an eye. The world would never know what she could have done, who she could have been. And while justice had been served, it was a justice that couldn't bring her back. Wow, what a journey this has been. But before we close this chapter, I want to thank all of you, my incredible subscribers, for your support and for making this channel what it is today. These stories take hours of research and dedication to bring to life, and I'm truly grateful for your ongoing encouragement. If you felt moved by this case, and if you want to see more hard-hitting, gripping true crime content like this, make sure to like this video. Subscribe to this channel to keep up with the latest investigations that will keep you at the edge of your seat. Share this story with someone who might need to hear it or who still believes that justice always prevails, because it does, even when it takes years. And please, turn on that notification bell so that you're the first to know when I drop a new video. Trust me, you'll want to be there. Thank you again for being part of this journey, and let's keep unraveling these mysteries together. What do you think about Gary Mitchell's confession? Could there be more to this story? Is there something darker yet to be uncovered? Something that we've all missed along the way? The weight of the case, the twist, the deception, it all hangs in the air unanswered. Maybe there are other questions still waiting to be asked, hidden under the surface. If you're still wondering whether Gary Mitchell was hiding more secrets, if this case still haunts you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know your thoughts below. What would you have done if you were in Margaret's shoes? What more could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Did we truly get all the answers? Or is there something we missed? There's so much more to uncover, and we'll continue bringing these stories to light. Don't miss the next one. Because in the end, it's not just about solving the case. It's about remembering the people whose lives were cut short, and ensuring that their stories are never forgotten. Sometimes, the deepest scars are the ones that remain unseen, buried beneath the surface, hidden from the world. We often think that the truth will come out in time, that the answers will eventually find their way to the light. But what happens when time itself becomes the barrier between us and the truth? What happens when we're forced to live with a question that lingers, unanswered, for years? This is the story of Hillary Evans, a young woman who vanished from the streets of Battle Creek, Michigan, in 1993, leaving behind nothing but the cold and empty remnants of what once was. She was just 18, a girl with dreams, plans for college, a part-time job, and the whole world ahead of her. And yet, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Disappeared. The town of Battle Creek was never prepared for something like this. They had known crime, small-town squabbles, petty thefts, occasional break-ins. But a missing person? That was something no one had the answers for. And when Hillary disappeared, the community was thrust into a kind of madness. Every shadow became a potential hiding place, every neighbor a suspect. There were no answers, only questions. And as the years wore on, those questions became less frequent. Hope turned to despair. I can't help but think of Margaret Evans, the woman who lost her daughter in the most unimaginable way. The pain of not knowing what happened. That sense of powerlessness, the kind that seeps into every corner of your life, turning even the brightest moments into echoes of emptiness. Margaret kept Hillary's room exactly the way it was, a shrine to the daughter she lost. And I think about what that must have been like for her. The daily reminders that she lived in a world where a part of her was stolen from her, a part that would never be returned. That sense of being half a person. Margaret would go to the police station every Tuesday and Friday. She would walk in as though in a trance, knowing that the answers she sought weren't there, that the case hadn't progressed, but still clinging to a thread of hope that somehow, someone, somewhere would find the piece of the puzzle that had been lost. The weariness in her eyes must have told a story of its own, a story of waiting, of believing, of clinging to something that was slipping further away. The year was 2018 when Detective Sarah Coleman came into the story. She was new to the cold case unit, with a fresh perspective and a sharp eye for details. But what she would uncover in Hillary's case would turn everything on its head. What if the story was never about what happened to Hillary, but about who in her community was hiding a dark secret? And then there was Gary Mitchell, the neighbor, the good guy, the man who helped with the search, who consoled the Evans family, who lived next door to them for years without anyone ever questioning his intentions. How could it be? How could someone so trusted, so seemingly innocent, have been the one to destroy a life? I've seen this before. The ones who hide in plain sight. The ones who learn how to weave their way into the fabric of a community, to make everyone believe they belong, all while they hide their darkest secrets. Gary Mitchell was that person. For 25 years, he wore the mask of a caring neighbor, a helpful friend, all while the truth about what happened to Hillary Evans was buried beneath layers of deception. When Detective Coleman found Gary's DNA on Hillary's clothing, I wonder what went through her mind. What kind of weight must have settled on her chest when the truth started to form itself into something she could no longer ignore? Gary Mitchell was no longer just a witness. He was a suspect. And the gravity of that discovery must have been staggering. The thing about people who lie is that they always think they'll get away with it, that the truth will never catch up to them, that they can live in their web of deception forever. But the truth has a way of finding its way out, even when it's buried in years of silence. Gary Mitchell thought he had covered his tracks. He thought he could escape what he did to Hillary Evans. But in the end, the truth did come out. Not in the way anyone expected, but it came. And it was brutal. I think about that moment in the interrogation room. The moment Gary's world crumbled. The moment he realized that no amount of pretending, no amount of lying, would save him. It's almost heartbreaking, isn't it? To see someone finally face the consequences of their actions, to see the mask slip away. Gary Mitchell's confession wasn't just the truth. It was the collapse of a life he had built on deception, guilt, and fear. But for Margaret, the mother who had waited all those years, what did it mean? What did it mean to finally hear the truth, to finally get the closure she so desperately needed, only to realize that it came too late to heal the wound? There is no true justice for someone who has lost a child. There is no real closure. But perhaps in that moment, Margaret could finally put down the weight she had carried for 25 long years. The weight of not knowing, of not understanding, of living in a constant state of grief and fear. It's a tragedy that no one should ever have to live through. The loss of a child, the disappearance of someone you love without a trace, the pain of not knowing what happened. It's a darkness that settles in your heart and refuses to leave. And while the truth of Hillary's disappearance came to light, while the murderer was convicted, I can't help but wonder, was it enough? Was it enough for the Evans family? We tell ourselves that justice will bring closure. We tell ourselves that the truth will heal us. But in reality, sometimes the truth only leaves us with more questions, more pain, more loss. There's no way to fill the hole that Hillary's absence created. And no amount of time or truth can ever undo the harm that was done. This case, this story, will stay with me. It will stay with all of us. Because it reminds us of the fragility of life, the vulnerability of those we trust, and the painful reality that sometimes the worst betrayals come from those who are closest to us. Gary Mitchell was a man who betrayed not just Hillary Evans, but an entire community. And his confession, while bringing some measure of justice, also leaves us wondering how many others like him are out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the truth to find them. In the end, we all have our own darkness, our own secrets. And sometimes, those secrets are so deeply buried that they take decades to reveal. But when they do, they leave a trail of destruction that can never be undone. The case of Hillary Evans was a tragedy, a story of loss, pain, and betrayal. And yet, even as we reflect on it, we must ask ourselves, how many other stories are there waiting to be uncovered? How many more truths are out there, waiting for their moment to break free? Only time will tell. And if you've been moved by the mystery of Hillary Evans and the devastating truth about her disappearance, subscribe for more shocking true crime cases, investigations that leave us questioning everything we thought we knew. There's so much more to uncover, and we'll continue bringing these stories to light. Don't miss the next one.